Pop Called Pod. Welcome to the weekly transmission of the Pop Called Pod, live from the Pop Called compound. I am your cult leader and host, Tom Pot. And as we do every week, I hope you're thirsty because we have got a glass of Kool-Aid. I really don't have a way of starting this segment. Music or a jingle would be nice, but I have no talent in that, to be honest. No transition is as good as any, I guess. We have normally 8 stories from across the mediums. This week, we have about 7. It's been a pretty quiet week, but we also need a bit more time to talk about the Oscars. So we're going to begin with some potentially positive news, hopefully, about Captain Marvel, and that we got some early reactions. Now, take this all with a grain of salt. Early reactions are not always correct. Sometimes people completely disagree with them. A lot of times you got to keep in mind the fact that these are people that are seeing a movie early, are getting to meet the cast, they're getting wined and dined, and that can affect their judgment. But what we are hearing is that it's weirder than you expect. People are liking it a lot. It's very positive overall. Brie Larson is getting a lot of praise, as is Ben Mendelsohn, who's apparently a fantastic villain, and that the origin is well done. And everyone is pretty much talking about the cat, Goose, saying he's a scene stealer, which if you read the comics and you know anything about Captain Marvel's cat, sure seems to confirm what we might expect the cat to be. Anyway, this movie is out really soon. This movie is out like a week and a half, so I don't even think these reactions are a big deal because we'll be able to find out for ourselves soon enough. But we should mention what's going on with this movie, which is that this week it's been a target of, I don't know what you want to call them, men. Certain people, a lot of people are saying alt-right, that kind of stuff. They've been bombarding the movie on Rotten Tomatoes with negative reviews. And it's not the first time this has happened. It's happened with The Last Jedi before. Happened with Ghostbusters, of course, more infamously. Which I'm not going to talk about Ghostbusters. And it's not surprising. It happens all the time. Happened with Black Panther as well. Anytime there's a minority or a non-male character, this seems to happen. Which is just a shame, really. I mean, can the internet just judge something on its own merit for once? Or maybe this is all blown out of proportion. But either way, just today, I'm recording this a little bit later than I usually do, Rotten Tomatoes announced a change to their rating system, which means that at the very least you can't rate the movie before you've seen it, which is like, why could you do that before? I don't know, ridiculous stuff. Oh, and another brief Marvel news, talking about a female-led Marvel movie, Black Widow. Kevin Feige said that was never going to be rated R. So, take that what you will. But speaking of Black Widow, let's talk about another spy. We talked about it last week, and we got even more news this week. And that is Bond 25. I'm not going to do my Sean Connery impression, because that didn't go very well last week. Or any week. But here's what we are going to do. My Pierce Brosnan impression. Now, this isn't from Bond, but it is from Taffin, there we go. Ladies and gentlemen, please, for your consideration, Pierce Brosnan and Taffin. What goes on in this town is none of your business. As long as I'm living here, it is. Then maybe you shouldn't be living here! There you go, another reference you understand. This has been a brief moment of Bond with Tom Pot. Oh right, yeah, there's actually news. Oh right, news about Bond. Sorry, I forgot what the show was. So, we got...
What goes on in this town is none of your business.
As long as I'm living here, it is.
Then maybe you shouldn't be living here!
Well, that's easily fixed.
This has been a brief moment of Bond with Tom Pot. Oh right, yeah, there's actually news. Oh right, news about Bond. Sorry, I forgot what the show was. So, we got what people are saying is the official title. I don't know, is this a case where people might just be picking up the production title, which is often kind of used to hide what the actual movie's about, although this one doesn't seem to be hiding what it's about at all, and that the title for this movie has been revealed as Shatterhand. So again, it's a working title, likely to change before it hits cinemas, but Shatterhand is noteworthy because it's a reference to Dr. Guntram Shatterhand, which is an alias used by Blofeld, which of course was played by Christoph Waltz in Spectre. Probably James Bond's most formidable ally. I guess spoiler for Spectre, if you haven't seen it. I mean, that was like 4 years ago or something. Blofeld was still alive at the end of Spectre. Good chance he could still be in the running to return for this one. I think Kerry Fukunaga, who is directing this film, said that he would be happy to have Christoph Waltz back. I thought Spectre sucked, especially because it leaned onto these old Bonds so much. I think there was an issue. Also, we should mention that Bond titles do have a preference for leaning on body parts. We have Goldfinger, Goldeneye, Shatterhand. I mean, Thunderball? Oh, hey. Anyway, that is what we have for the Bond sequel. I'm also as disappointed as you that last week I had James Bond news and it was in episode 007 and I didn't make that connection. It's legitimately probably the thing I'm most disappointed. I'm really really annoyed me that I didn't make that connection, which is disappointing. Well, speaking of films that are likely to be disappointing, Space Jam 2. Not that I mean is the first one kind of good? Is that the first one or even disappointing? This is just a nostalgia thing at this point. I don't know. Anyway, Warner Bros. Have given it a date. It's set to come out July 16, 2021. Quite a bit of time yet. Going to star LeBron James, of course, directed by Terrence Nance. Ryan Coogler is producing this movie. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting talent attached to this movie. This is fascinating to me. I won't believe this film is a thing until I can sit down and not watch it. I don't know if I'm going to go watch this movie, but until it's possible that I can go watch it. We'll put it that way. So such a strange thing. It seems like it's just being lifted up by, nostalgia and meme potential, but films have performed, better for worse reasons. So another sequel they did that Warner Bros. Did this week was Godzilla vs. Kong, which is good news. It's actually been moved up 2 months. It was originally coming out in May. Now it's coming out in March 2020. So there you go. There you have that. So good news if you're a fan of 90s cartoon movies with Michael Jordan or famous NBA basketball players or monster movies. Other sequel news we got was A Quiet Place. Of course, the original was done by John Krasinski, and this week it was confirmed that he is going to return to direct and write the sequel, which got a release date of May 15, 2020. I'm not going to spoil the ending of A Quiet Place, but I will just say that the main cast members who you would expect to return for this film are going to return. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to be very cryptic and mysterious, like A Quiet Place was. I can't really remember that film, even though I saw it. I know the premise. I kind of remember how it ends. Did we see the monster in that movie? Oh yeah, we did. Yeah, no, pretty good movie. I don't think there's a need for a sequel, but hey, what do I know? Made a lot of money, so I guess that's always going to be the case. Ugh, I can't transition to the story. Transition! Reggie Fils-Aimé, the president and COO at Nintendo of America, has announced he's going to retire. Reggie is going to leave Nintendo of America with his last day being on April 15th. He has been the president of Nintendo of America since 2006, but he's been with Nintendo for over 15 years. I think he began in 2003. And yeah, he's become a really adored figure among Nintendo fans and even gamers in general for his kind of warmth and character. And obviously he became a meme a few years ago when he came on stage when they were doing, was it what, Wii Fit, was that what it was called? Which was like a fancy weighing scale? I don't And he just came on stage and said, "My body is ready." And then that became a meme from there. But in general, really, you got to give it to Reggie. Anytime there's all these E3 presentations, he comes across as a lot more charismatic and nice than a lot of the heads. Like, whatever with Sony, a lot of Sony guys are bland, or else there's a language barrier. The Xbox guys come off as total douches every year. They come out and they're like, "Let's look at the next generation of Xbox, bro." Xbox has had another year of just totally crushing it. But Reggie's always had a nice demeanour. He's been very pleasant, and even as someone who's not a massive Nintendo fan, I think it's probably miss him. He's an entertaining and quite a nice guy by all accounts. He did put out a message thanking fans with the kind of warmth you would expect any announcer's retirement, saying he's going to spend time with friends and family and just enjoy retired life from the sound of it. He's going to be replaced by Doug Bowser, which a lot of people are saying is perfectly named, although he's named after a villain, so I don't know, is that a good thing? He's been basically mentored by Reggie for the last 5 years, so big changes at Nintendo of America for what it's worth, but I'm sure overall it doesn't matter in the long run. But best of luck to Reggie in his retirement. I don't think I need to transition to this one. I have 2 news stories left. I'll talk about the Oscars at the end, and this is probably the best story I've ever heard. And I think it probably deserves to be delivered in a certain way. And that is the Hulk Hogan biopic, brother. You see, Netflix announced that Chris Hemsworth is going to be playing the Hulkamaniac, brother. Oh, I'll spare you. I could do that for the whole story. I really could. This is amazing. So, what's happening? Hulk Hogan is getting a biopic. And I know I've a couple of times to say biopic. That's just a slip of the tongue. I keep saying that. And he's going to be portrayed by Chris Hemsworth, which I can't think of a bigger compliment to Hulk Hogan than Chris Hemsworth is going to play you. Chris, like Hulk Hogan with what do they say? That the hair of a Chinese man and the skin of a hot dog is going to be played by Chris freaking Hemsworth. Wow, I'm guessing Hogan had to say in that. It's going to be directed by Todd Phillips, who obviously did the Hangover movies. Was that film War Dogs, and he's probably most notable now for working on DC's Joker. He's also going to take one of the writers of that film, Scott Silver, along with him for this movie. John Polano, Polono, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. Of course, at least in every episode I have to mispronounce one person's name at the very least. He worked on Stronger, the Jake Gyllenhaal film about the person who they lost their legs in the Boston Marathon. That's all I know about that movie. That's probably wrong anyway. This is a really interesting movie for a couple of reasons. First of all, just the borderline insanity that Hulk Hogan is going to be played by Chris Hemsworth, which is just hilarious. Not bad casting or anything, it's just kind of funny. Because you can imagine Hulk Hogan just being like, I need someone who looks like a god, brother. And of course they were like, Hemsworth, I guess. But it's the producers on this film are really interesting. So, Bradley Cooper is a producer on this movie. Him and Todd Phillips, I guess, own a production company together. And then Eric Bischoff. So if you're not a wrestling fan, let me just briefly explain. So Eric Bischoff was the former president of WCW. So now we have the WWE. And previously it was the WWF. Their big competitor back, especially in the 90s, I think maybe the early 2000s, I could be wrong there, was WCW. In what they had called the Monday Night Wars, where these two brands basically were the biggest thing in wrestling, and they competed for ratings. And what a lot of people said was the point where WCW got massive and posed real competition to WWE was when Hulk Hogan, who was, throughout the 80s, like the guy in WWE, or WWF as it was then. So when he jumped ship to WCW, it was seen as like, whoa, this is a proper competitor here. And in fact, they were leading the charge for a while. They were beating WWF at that time. It's interesting he's involved, because he obviously would have had quite an impact on Hogan's career going into that, and what that will mean for the film. Obviously is where it's likely to deal with, probably up to that 90s period, up to WCW. What's strange is I don't see anyone else involved as far as on the WWE or WWF side. Whether that means that this film is going to focus mostly on the WCW stuff, I don't know. I would imagine they try to get a producer on, at least for a token credit from someone from the WWE, but that's not a big deal, I guess. What they have said is the film isn't going to focus on his whole life. Instead, sources are saying it's going to focus on the rise, and it's described as an origin story of the Hulkster and Hulkamania, which is something someone actually wrote in the article, which is odd, because you think if you're doing that, it's going to focus more on WWF, but they have Eric Bischoff involved. So I don't know, we don't really know much else about this movie. It's like a question of how far is this going to go. It's not going to focus on the recent scandals with Hogan. The sex tape and the Gawker trial and all that stuff is apparently not on the table. It was quite a massive deal they put together. It includes life rights to Terry Bollea or Hulk Hogan. He's acting as a consultant on the film, as well as an executive producer. Now, what you probably should realise, if you're not a wrestling fan, you might notice, Hogan was kind of known as a bit of a conniving backstage politicker in the world of wrestling. He always tried to make sure he came out positive and screwed over a lot of people in that regard. Question is whether or not the movie's going to be able to accurately portray that with Hogan involved, or is it going to be a real glamorizing of the Hogan character? Also, the fact that it focuses on such an early career, I can imagine they could probably make another film out of this. But it is interesting that they're moving into films based on wrestlers now. We obviously had Paige come out this week, the Fighting With My Family film. So it looks like that could be, the start of wrestling movies. So obviously, if you listen to this, you probably know I'm a wrestling fan. So I'm watching this with interest. It's going to be very, very strange, but I want to see how this goes. Obviously Hogan has a tendency to exaggerate as well. I hope it's not a vanity piece. The chance it could be. We'll have to see though. Certainly very interesting. And the director, Todd Phillips, is obviously no stranger to showing excess and going a bit darker with his comedy, so possibly could see that work. I assume it's going to focus on maybe the steroid trend as well. So, could you imagine if this was like really successful and I went on to an Oscars? Having Hulk Hogan at the Oscars would be like the funniest thing ever. Anyway, let me tell you something, brother. I want to know what you think should be a title for this movie, because I've heard people come up with titles all week and none of them have been really great. If it was like a fall of Hulk Hogan when it comes crashing down, because that's his theme song. I don't know. Hulkamania. And what you gonna do when the Oscars run wild over you, brother? No, see, that's the easiest transition I've ever had to do. All I had to do was speak like Hulk Hogan, and it kind of covered it up. I mean, I won't say it entirely covered it up, but you know, as smooth as the rest of the show, I guess. Which of course brings us to the Oscars, which happened this week. I'm going to start with some of, well, I won't call them the lesser categories, that would be disrespectful. Not that because I've been so respectful of the Oscars to this point. But I'll start with the smaller categories, we'll say. So, first we have the visual effects, which went to First Man. I didn't think much of First Man as a movie, I thought it was okay. Visual effects in it were pretty good. This kind of feels like, to me, the Oscars didn't want to recognise the big budget stuff like Solo or Avengers. I will comment on a few of these movies that I haven't commented on already. I was going to make a YouTube video originally about the movies that seemed like they would be prime for Oscar material, but kind of didn't get Best Picture nominations and that kind of thing. But I just felt like there wasn't a lot to say about some of them, and you know how much I talked about the Oscars enough at this point. I'm just glad they're over. So yeah, First Man, not undeserving, but yeah, look, this was always going to win for visual effects, really, when you look at what it was up against. Editing went to Bohemian Rhapsody, total joke, in my opinion. The editing in it is unnatural and obnoxious in that movie, really. And I actually thought something was interesting. I saw a clip going around the internet of Bohemian Rhapsody's editing where they're talking to Aidan Gillen's character, the members of Queen. And it keeps cutting a lot, like just the band members, and sometimes they're not even saying anything. And then it clicked that I thought I heard that there was in the contracts that each member of Queen had to have equal time. Which I think that might be a smoking gun. It really seems like there's just moments where they're like, okay, well, don't show Freddie Mercury, we have to get Brian May in there. Like, nonsense. Editing, completely undeserved. But anyway, it doesn't really matter, I guess. Makeup and hair went to Vice. Again, I said I wasn't a huge fan of Vice, but the makeup and hair was nice. It was a little bit subtle. You know, deserving winner, to be fair. Cinematography went to Alfonso Cuarón for Roma. This is the first time a director has ever won cinematography for their own movie. And the cinematography for Roma is, you know, quite beautiful. Especially suits the black and white and the setting. So, deserving win, I think. Sound editing and mixing. This is, just to be clear, this is two different Oscars. A lot of people actually debate what the point is of having two separate categories for this, because some people don't even know the difference. Other people, when you look at the nominations, sound editing and mixing are normally the exact same as far as the nominations go. Bohemian Rhapsody won both of these, possibly again proving that there's no reason for this to be two Oscars. Look, Bohemian Rhapsody has a lot of problems. I've railed against it enough, and I'm sure I will a bit further on as well. The sound was good in this. Can't take that away from it. It was quite well done, and you would expect that for a film that's so hinged on the importance of the music. Just to be clear as well, as far as the amount of awards each film won, Bohemian Rhapsody walked away with the most awards. It won 4 awards. So, controversial, to put it mildly. Best original song went to Shallow. I've been calling it Shallows this whole time like an idiot, and no one even bothered to correct me, but there you go. Deserving win, I think. As I said before, I think the only competition I might have had would be from All the Stairs, the Black Panther soundtrack, but I like that song. Transcended the movie. This is, you know, Lady Gaga getting her Oscar. She was never going to get it for the acting category, so yeah, I'm okay with this. This is definitely a good win. In fact, it's probably a good win as far as looking back at the original song wins in the past. This is a good win. Fair one. Then you have the score, which went to Black Panther. I didn't think it was actually going to win Best Score. Now, I will say there was a noteworthy snub with First Man in this category. I think First Man could have got in there, even though I didn't like the film. I thought the score was quite good. You know, this is Black Panther's, I guess you could say, one of the big nights for Black Panther. It actually won 3 Oscars. 1 for score, 1 for costume, and 1 for production design. That's pretty impressive. It's tied for second most awards in the night, with about 3 more films. That Green Book and Roma, maybe? I think, yeah, that and Roma, I think. Yeah, first Marvel movie, the MCU, to get an Oscar. And it got 3, so how bad? Best Foreign Language went to Roma. I said this was kind of redundant. Of course, it's nominated for Best Foreign Language, and when it's also nominated for Best Picture, I mean, who are you fooling? You can't, if you're going to say this film is one of the best pictures of the year and it's better than all the other foreign language films of the year, no surprise it won. I liked Roma. In fact, I would say, as far as I ranked my movies last week, I had Roma number 1 and Favourite number 2. In my head over the week, I think maybe Favourite might have edged it out. I think Favourite might be number 1 now I look back. But there you have it. Foreign language went to Roma, no surprise. Best animated film went, thank God, to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Well deserving. Not that there weren't some great animated films this year, but Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, I think, probably deserves some stuff outside of just animation, really. It was a fantastic movie, and the animation was gorgeous, so it definitely deserved the animation one. Someone else pointed out, this is the first year that Disney haven't won Best Animated Feature when they've had a film in the running, which is end of an era to a certain degree, I suppose. Or first time in a long time, at least, anyway. Obviously, the normal winner for this would be Pixar. They didn't walk away empty-handed. They won Animated Short for Bao, which played in front of The Incredibles 2. So, there's a bit of a silver lining to them for them. Best Adapted Screenplay went to Black Klansman. The screenplay for Black Klansman was pretty good. I can't really think of an option that was also, or that was more worthy, I guess. Can You Ever Forgive Me? I didn't think much of that movie, but could have been a decent screenplay adaptation. I'm not entirely sure. I didn't think it was a great movie or the great script either, but anyway. Best Original Screenplay went to Green Book. What a freaking joke. After railing against this film so much last week and saying how lazily written it was, how it didn't even deserve a nomination, it won Best Original Screenplay. Do you need more evidence that this film is, or that the Oscars in general are just moving towards it being irrelevant? Or I don't know. Look, obviously a lot of people like this film, I think, and maybe I'm in the minority. I just think that was a ridiculous nomination. Forget about a ridiculous win. Anyway, I'm sure we'll talk about Green Book a bit more in a minute. Best Supporting Actress went to Regina King for If Beale Street Could Talk. If Beale Street Could Talk was a pretty good movie. Didn't think it was, got really overlooked when it came to the awards season. I think people expected it to be one of the top dogs in the Oscar fight, and it really wasn't this year. And I thought the film was alright. I didn't think it was fantastic, but Regina King was very good in her role, so deserving win. It was a very competitive category. I would have been happy with any of the actresses from The Favourite winning it as well, so tough category, but definitely a deserving winner. Best Supporting Actor went to Mahershala Ali. That was not really a surprise. I thought the category was not too competitive this year. Mahershala Ali is a great actor, and he was quite good in the season of Green Book, so deserving win there as well. Best Actress went to Olivia Colman, which, she was well deserving that award. Whatever else you want to say about that film, if you didn't like it, but she definitely deserved that win. That was a fantastic performance. She gave quite a great speech as well. If you go off almost people were a huge fan of her speech, and great to see her doing so well in Hollywood. And that, of course, brings us to Best Actor. This went to Rami Malek, who I made my opinions pretty clear about a lot of these actually last week. I said I thought his performance was overrated. It's a bit of a caricature of Freddie Mercury. I actually retweeted an article by a guy from Up Rocks that was way better at conveying what I was trying to say. That just didn't really feel like actually Freddie Mercury. Just felt like some cartoonish idea of what Freddie Mercury is. So, undeserving, but not entirely surprising, in my opinion. It is what it is. That's the 4 wins that Bohemian Rhapsody got, so it was the most successful film at the Oscars this year. Best Director went to Alfonso Cuarón for Roma. No, not too surprising. I think pretty deserving overall. Like that film has his fingers all over it. He wrote it, directed it, he did the cinematography. He got great performances out of pretty inexperienced actors, some amazing performances actually. So I think quite a good choice for Best Director this year, certainly. And that brings us to our final, most important, I guess. Best Picture of the Year went to Green Book. That's ridiculous, isn't it? Look, some people out there obviously love this movie. Evidently the Academy loved it. I just don't get it. Whatever else about some of the films now this year, there's worse films, but there's much better ones as well. There's just a lot wrong with that movie, and it does not deserve a Best Picture. People are kind of comparing it to Crash when Crash won. I haven't seen Crash. I've heard of its reputation, but it's not deserving of a Best Picture at all. When you look at the problems I mentioned last week alone, and from a writing standpoint and how predictable it is, it's definitely not deserving. It's bolstered by some good performances, and there is some good things about it, but I don't know, it just seems like a really, given the climate of race in America at the moment, like the real racial conflicts and all that going on in America at the moment, so it seems like a very odd choice as well that they went for such a safe kind of warm film about race. And maybe it was just because they wanted a break from the more strong films about racism or slavery that they often get, but yeah, just not a good choice for Best Picture in my opinion. Maybe Spike Lee felt the same. He freaked out and all that. Spike Lee, by the way, I didn't even mention it, he won his first competitive Oscar for Black Klansman. I just feel like Green Book is a film that not only does it not work now. I think it's definitely not going to stand the test of time, but it's I don't know, you can never really predict what the Academy is going to do, can you? I mean, I guess you can. A lot of people probably thought this was going to win. I just kind of hoped I was wrong, thinking they would pick it. Actually, if you do want to see an insight into what the Academy is like, the Hollywood Reporter, every time the Oscars are on, they run a topic called Blind Ballot, or was it, no, it's Anonymous Ballot or something, where they talk to a member of the Academy and how they voted and explain it, and it gives an amazing insight. People being like, Roma was just an expensive home movie, or I'm not going to watch that movie, or this sucked, or I love this movie, where you're like, what the hell? How are these people in charge of the Oscars? But the Oscars this year, people overall probably didn't like them. They did say they'd actually flowed a lot better without a host, and this is obviously probably a year where mainstream films rose up. The ratings were a lot better than usual. This could be the start of the new norm. More popular films, less comedic maybe, a more flow to the ceremony, which I suppose that is good. But I think this could be another step towards the Oscars being a bit less relevant than they were. I don't know, we'll have to see. We can only judge that next year. Personally, I'm just glad we don't have to talk about the Oscars anymore. Depressing, really. With if you're a big fan of film, it's kind of sad with some of the wins here. But also, thankfully, I never gave the Oscars much credence anyway. So the good thing is, I don't have to think about it too long, and I've gotten over it already because I'm not a big fan of award shows. Let's cheer ourselves up a bit with the quick hits. Obviously, these are stories that we bring up, discuss very briefly, make a quick joke, and move quickly on. First up, The Walking Dead hit an all-time low this week in ratings. The show had just a 4.54 average million viewers. This has now surpassed the lowest rating the show has ever gotten, beating out the previous holder of this distinction, the second episode to ever air. There's no joke here, but you can laugh at the show. The Walking Dead. Jason Reitman said he will hand Ghostbusters back to the fans and that he's not making the Juno of Ghostbusters. I'm not touching that one. That's too moving on. Controversial. I'm not touching that one. Forget it. RoboCop became the Colonel for KFC this week, leaving fans of RoboCop confused, fans of KFC confused, and fans of neither indifferent. We are set to get an apparent reboot of RoboCop by Neil Blomkamp called RoboCop Returns. I don't know, personally, I feel like this franchise really needs a reboot outside the continuity, with an all-female cast directed by Paul... No! I'm not touching that, not touching that. That's suicide. It'd be like playing with a bomb, like Ghostbusters 2016 was a bomb. Stop! No! Quick recover. Save the bit. Go to KFC and say I buy that for $1. What the hell? What happened with that segment this week? Jesus Christ, that completely derailed. Ugh. I'm sorry about that. That was messy and borderline dangerous territory. Moving on, we have to rethink that whole segment, man. Coming on to trailer trash. This was an odd week for trailers. I got trailers I didn't expect and really liked the look of. I got trailers I should be excited for and felt pretty indifferent towards. So we had a trailer for The Dirt. Now, if you don't know what The Dirt is, it's a Motley Crue biography. It's considered by a lot of people to be like the rock star biography because it's really brutally honest, has all the hallmarks of what you would think rock and roll. Like, if, for example, if you ever heard the story of Ozzy Osbourne snorting ants, that comes from The Dirt, and it's real about excess, and the band are just very blunt, and it's gritty and it's nasty in a lot of cases. I didn't realize, I'd forgotten that this was being made a movie. I remember hearing a lot about this movie before, but apparently it's coming up to Netflix, and it's directed by Jeff Tremaine, who I don't think he's directed anything in a scripted feature, but he's involved with Jackass and has been for a long time. So in that alone, you know he's a director who's not afraid to show excess or gratuitous violence or nudity or any of that stuff. He's not a timid director, which is what you need for this, really. It's weird because I railed against music biopics last week. We got 2 trailers for music biopics this week, and they're not bad looking, and I'm sure I'll see them and be like, oh. But this Dirt one, I'm not a huge Motley Crue fan. I don't think a lot of people are, really. I know, like, 2 songs. I know Kickstart My Heart, which is in this trailer, and I think they have one called Mr. Feelgood. No, it's Dr. Feelgood, is it? I don't know. This is a good trailer. Looks like it has a bit of everything, and I think it benefits to a certain degree in that Motley Crue were perceived by some people as a bit of a joke. Like, with something like Queen, you always knew it was going to be like, oh, look at the scales they've made it to. Look how great Queen are. I don't know if Motley Crue are going to fall into that trap. And there's also the fact that they were so dark and honest about the biography, and that the highs were so high and the lows were so low. I think this might be a bit more blunt and a bit honest. I think that works. Iwan Rowan, I'm probably mispronouncing his name too. He's Ramsay Bolton in Game of Thrones. He's in this film. Machine Gun Kelly is also in it. They're two members of Motley Crue. And it's coming to Netflix, which it certainly softens the blow of wanting to see this movie, because you don't even have to leave your house. It's coming out March 22nd. Yeah, it's a very good trailer, I must admit. Then the other trailer we had for our music biopic this week was Rocketman. This is obviously the Elton John film. They also had a feature this week where it showed Taron Egerton is doing his own singing for this, and he sounds fantastic, which is great. So that's definitely, I don't know if that's hoping for some Oscar love next year, but it definitely, you gotta like when someone's singing the actual songs. Like Rami Malek wasn't singing the songs, there was like a weird mix in there. I also think a positive thing is like Elton John has had longevity, and I don't think he really cares about his perception of him. So he is involved in this film, but I think he might be a bit more open to having his image a bit muddied. I mean, obviously, by the end of the film, that muddied image is going to be shown as gleaming anyway, because he'll come out as a successor. But I think he's retiring this year anyway, so maybe that won't be as big an issue. Obviously, he must be loaded at this point anyway, so who cares? He might just care about making a good movie. It's also, this is very appropriate to compare this to Bohemian Rhapsody, because this is directed by Dexter Fletcher, who essentially directed a lot of Bohemian Rhapsody after Bryan Singer was fired. I also have to say that visually this movie looks quite impressive. There's a lot of great shots, and obviously you have elaborate costumes because it's Elton John, and some kind of psychedelic visuals which I think are fantastic. I'm not necessarily a huge Elton John fan. Obviously he's got loads of songs I like, so I'm sure I'll see this film and enjoy it quite a bit because of that. The other point is that since he's had such a long career, I don't know what the scandals there are. I don't know much about it. So I know Bernie Taupin, I think, came in if they had might be a falling out or something. I don't know. Covers a long time span. I wonder if that will be an issue, because sometimes these movies find it difficult to focus when they cover such a long length of time. It's written by Lee Hall, who's written a lot of kind of acclaimed movies. He often does plays and musicals, so that might help it as well. It's coming out at the end of May, so I will say this trailer definitely has a bit of interest, and I'm not normally interested in musical biopics or Elton John, so that's more that of a compliment that I give to most films. We also got a trailer as of this recording, because I'm recording this a bit later than usual. Detective Pikachu just had a new trailer. Now, again, it only just came out recently, so I don't have as much to say. I haven't looked at it as much as maybe some of the other trailers. We get a lot of the characters that we've seen already, Charizard, Jigglypuff, that kind of thing. And it's a good trailer. This looks like it's going to be quite a charming, fun movie. I do wonder about the humour in this film though, and whether it really works as like a Pokemon movie, or is this kind of just skewering the brand a bit? I don't know though. It's weird, like it's weird seeing Pikachu say help and stuff like that, and sometimes it just feels like it's Ryan Reynolds. Yeah, it's quite an odd film in that way, because it's not, obviously people are going to say, oh, it's based on a game called Detective Pikachu. It doesn't seem very faithful to the Pokemon a lot of people know and love. But I don't think that will affect it. I think this is going to be a very successful film. I also wonder, like, after seeing this, if they do make a film that is more, or is closer to what people expect of a Pokemon film, are they going to be annoyed that the Pokemon can't talk again? We get some cool looks in this film, of course. We get Pikachu using his electricity, and we get a look at massive Pokemon battles, which I'm sure will look interesting. Although I do wonder with the CGI character designs whether it's going to look good or it's going to look a bit of a mess in a battle setting. I'm going to say spoiler for this is in the trailer. I don't think it's a major spoiler, but some people were a bit annoyed that they found out. So it's just a spoiler for the trailer. We get a first look at Mewtwo, who's in this movie. Who knows how big of a presence he will actually have in the movie? Whether he's maybe a big bad, whether he's going to be involved in it, I don't know. Certainly a welcome reveal though. They've said that there's a lot more twist in the movie. So who knows, we could possibly see something like Team Rocket. I'm excited for this movie. It's not one that I think looks fantastic, but of course I grew up with Pokemon like everyone else, so could be entertaining. Final trailer I want to talk about in depth is even debatable. Dragged Across Concrete. This stars Vince Vaughn, Mel Gibson. It's a new film from S. Craig Zahler, who directed Bone Tomahawk and Brawl in Cell Block 99. He's a real genre filmmaker. I like both of those movies overall, as much as I think they had flaws. I probably like Bone Tomahawk more. He's got a real B-movie style, you know, subtly, as opposed to just going straight for a B movie. A lot of people are comparing him to John Carpenter, which is probably pretty deserving comparison. A bit flattering also, maybe. There's nothing in this trailer. I've watched this trailer, I remember nothing about it. I don't think there was much in it. This is a movie that comes out in March, in theaters and on video on demand. The reviews for this, it premiered in Venice last year, got a decent reception. A lot of people said it's long and it drags, like, no pun intended there. And yeah, there's not a lot to latch onto in this trailer, so I hope there's a bit more there. Regardless, 2 trailers that came out this week I didn't watch, just in case you want to watch them. The Highwaymen, which stars Woody Harrelson and Kevin Costner, I think. I didn't watch this. I think these are the 2 men that hunted down Bonnie and Clyde or something. It just seems like a real dad movie. It's going up on Netflix, so it might be just one I throw on if I want to watch something someday. Not particularly interested in watching the trailer for it. We also got a teaser for Angry Birds 2. If you're interested in seeing this trailer, I'm surprised you're listening to this, to be honest. It seems like there'd be very little crossover. Then we got 2 trailers that were, I guess I'll say, disappointing in how little there was there. We had a trailer for The Irishman, which is barely worth discussion. It basically just said, this is who's in the film. It's Martin Scorsese's film. It's called The Irishman. It's coming in fall, which is pretty much all the details we knew already. And the brief sound clip saying, like, I heard you paint houses, which I think is the name of the book it's based on. Yeah, not much there. Still looking forward to this film. They said during the week, I believe, that the first half of this is all going to be de-aged actors. So I hope that looks good. No wonder it's going to be so expensive. And we got a new TV spot for The Lion King. And I was like, yes! We're getting another look at The Lion King. I can't wait for it to disprove me thinking it's going to be the same old thing. It's going to have the same footage. It's going to be shot for shot. It did none of that. It's like, it's the same trailer, except they recut it in like a weird order. It's a waste of time. If you've seen the first trailer, you don't need to see this trailer. Then again, you'd probably be the same as me and be like, oh yes, a Lion King trailer, I have to see this. And then be like, oh, okay. I want to talk a bit about trailer rumours. Trailers we're supposed to be getting soon, and one trailer that is baffling that we haven't gotten one. So, last week, as in I thought we would be discussing it this week, Mike Mignola, the creator of Hellboy, tweeted that we were getting a trailer for Hellboy, and that it was much better than the first one. Nothing happened. This film comes out in April, I think, so I'd imagine we're going to get another trailer soon. Certainly, it would be a good idea. We've got a few images and a few other things this week, so I imagine they're gearing up a bit of promotion. Possibly could get one this week. X-Men Dark Phoenix, I think, is getting a trailer on Wednesday this week. They put out a poster just recently. Yeah, look, no, I'm not excited for Dark Phoenix. Let's see what the trailer looks like. I do want to talk about a trailer. I think we've been expecting a trailer for this to drop since the show began. And that's for Shazam. Been a lot of controversy about this trailer because people are obviously badgering the director, David F. Sandberg. He said something along the lines of, don't worry, we're working on it. Obviously, the promotion isn't going to slow down now because it's so soon. And James Wan said something like, hey, they were saying the same thing when Aquaman hadn't got a trailer at a certain point, and when it got moved from October to December. Here's the thing. We've got one trailer for Shazam, and it came out at Comic-Con, which is when we got the first trailer for Aquaman as well. We got another trailer for Aquaman, I think, by October? Start of October? Nearly 3 months from when the actual movie came out. This movie's out in 6 weeks, and we still haven't got a TV spot, I think, and the original trailer, which is now, what, 9 months ago nearly? What's going on here? Why? I don't understand why they're being. If some people would normally suggest it's a case of the effects aren't being finished. If the effects aren't finished 6 weeks out from the movie, that could be an issue. I don't think that is the issue. I don't know what the problem is though. I don't know why we haven't got another trailer for it. Maybe they want to see if they can get clear of Captain Marvel before they promote their Captain Marvel movie of Shazam. It is really odd that there's been such radio silence on this. I'm sure we're going to get one soon, because otherwise there might be issues trying to promote this movie so quickly. Which brings us to our box office. Top of the box office this week, we'll do it 1 to 5 this week. How to Train Your Dragon came in with 55 million. It's the biggest debut of the year so far. It's actually also the biggest debut for How to Train Your Dragon film, and the reviews are quite good. So yeah, this is the end of this franchise, I believe. This was I think they're in a very strange point, the animated Universal movies, because they were bigging up like, oh, Kung Fu Panda is going to be like a 5-film franchise or something. How to Train Your Dragon could be an 8-film franchise. And now they're both done at 3, and I think they're just gearing towards, Illumination or whatever, with the Grinch and Minions and all that. But this is apparently a very good film. I haven't seen it myself. I'm sure I will eventually. did quite well as well. It'll be interesting to see how it performs. Obviously, it's going to have competition from Captain Marvel, not this week, but the following week. And unfortunately, that really hurt some of the other entries this week, which was coming in second. We had Alita, which had 12 million. Not a bad performance. Pretty modest drop of about 57%. What I will say is Alita, I think they always expect it not to do great domestically. Internationally, it's not doing too bad. It made 62.2 million in China on its debut weekend, which is quite a good number. Now it has about 263 million worldwide. I don't know where this film is going to end up. It certainly looks like it's going to lose money still, which could be a shame if you wanted more of them. I would have been okay with another one, but I'm not going to be too broken up either. Coming in at number 3, a film that's no doubt going to be hurt a lot by How to Train Your Dragon doing so good, is the Lego Movie, which is really struggling. Like, it does not look good for this franchise right now. Made 136.6 million worldwide so far. I don't think it's going to break 200 million worldwide, which means the only Lego film it's going to pass is Ninjago. I really wonder what they're going to do with this franchise now after this, because this is a real disappointment for them. Then we had 4. We had Fighting With My Family. This made 8 million, and that's quite a good debut for a smaller film. I think if it has good legs, they're doing well. They're obviously promoting a lot. I'm seeing a lot of promotion for it. I might see this at the end of the week. I don't know if I'll review it, or maybe I'll just put up a quick review on YouTube. But reviews of this have been very good. So if word of mouth is good, this could do well. You know, I don't think it's gonna climb the charts or anything, but I think it could probably add a little bit to that every week and do quite well for itself, which is nice to see. Isn't it romantic? I didn't know what this was last week. Rebel Wilson in a rom-com. Doing pretty good numbers for a rom-com. It came in 3rd last week. This week it's 5th. I made 7.5 million. Which is a 47% drop, which isn't much at all. So I think there's no other real romantic comedies out right now. Well, there's what's that one called? What Men Want? No, What Women Want. No, What Women Want. Yeah, What Men Want. I was right the first time. That's out, but I think that's kind of faded a little bit. So we'll see. Anyway, hack headline. How to Train Your Dragon. Well, you certainly don't have to train it to make money, because this one made some pretty decent money, I'll tell you that. And certainly good opening. You need to train your dragon if it was real, because it can make money when adapted to a movie. Oh, I don't know what I'm saying. That's the headline. I don't know. That one needs work, I guess. Bringing us to our weekly watch. Not a lot this week. Movies coming out. We have Tyler Perry's A Medea Family Funeral in America. I don't think these movies are released internationally. I could be wrong there. I don't remember ever seeing one outside of America. Climax, Gaspar Noé's psychological horror musical film, is getting a limited release in America. Television, we have Leaving Neverland. This is the very controversial Michael Jackson documentary where they talk about his alleged sexual abuse, child abuse even. It aired at Sundance, and some people, reported that there was no doubt left in their mind that Michael Jackson abused children. And other people have said it's very one-sided and not entirely accurate or fair. Just lambastes him after his death when he can't defend himself. But yeah, anyway, either way, it's a controversial one. I think you'll probably have to watch it and make your mind up for yourself. It's airing in 2 parts on HBO. First part is airing on Sunday, then second part will air on Monday. Better Things is coming back for season 3 on FX. This is the Pamela Adlon series. It's airing on Thursday again. Whiskey Cavalier. This is actually the first episode aired after the Oscars. Lauren Cohen and Scott Foley are in this. I've heard mixed things overall for this show, but if you want to check it out, it officially begins Wednesday, which means the first episode is airing Wednesday, and then I think that's going to be its regular slot from there on. Also, this slipped my mind last week because sometimes it's hard to keep track of when shows debut in Britain or England or whatever you want to call it. Alan Partridge this time started yesterday. Reviews for this have been very positive. If you like Alan Partridge, which I certainly do, you should check out this one, Alan Partridge this time. And finally, Netflix. Not a lot coming to Netflix this week, but we do have The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, which is written and directed by Chiwetel Ejiofor. Pretty good reviews for this if you want to check it out. And that brings us to our segment, our feature, I guess. I'm going to talk, like I said, Endgame is coming out in April. I'm going to spend each subsequent month talking about a Phase Marvel movie. So, for February, we're talking about Phase 1, the first 6 Marvel movies. So, here we go. Marvel Cinematic Universe is the highest grossing film franchise of all time. And it doesn't sound like it's going to show any signs of stopping. In fact, the highest grossing entry came out just last year. And considering how many films we've had so far, it really looks like this thing could run and run for quite a while to come. So I felt like in the build up to Avengers Endgame, which should be a culmination of a lot of these stories, it would be appropriate to look back at the MCU in general. And of course we're going to start that with Phase 1. What I like about the first phase of Marvel films, especially the older ones, is that there's a bit more edge and a kind of darkness to them that isn't there in some of the later films, especially in phase 2. In fact, even at the end of phase 1, it becomes a bit less noticeable. This is at a time when the MCU is trying to learn what would make it work, and we'll see how it picks up certain tropes along the way with this. So before we start, just to state fairly my thoughts on the Marvel movies as we go into them, because I'll be talking about these a lot over the next few months. At least right now, I don't think there's a bad MCU Marvel movie. There's some boring ones, there's some bland ones, but none in my opinion are like outright bad. I actually compared a lot to Pixar, another Disney subsidiary, before Cars 2, where there was a few lesser films in there, like for example the first Cars or Bug's Life, but none of them are outright awful. I've seen all these films before. In fact, I did one a week in the run up to Infinity War last year. I've seen all them before, but I think with Endgame coming and the podcast launch, now is a good time to look back on them. I'll talk about what I like about them, what they meant for the universe, and also the Stan Lee cameos and post-credit scenes. What works, just a bit of fun on that end. We wouldn't get our first Marvel movie until 2008. I think an important point to start at might be in 2006, at that year's Comic-Con. Marvel had a panel, and not even a major one, at least compared to where they are now. They had Jon Favreau for Iron Man, Louis Leterrier for a new Hulk film, and Edgar Wright for Ant-Man. This was originally slated to be Marvel's lineup, as it became the first major independent studio since DreamWorks. They planned to produce their own films, not like co-productions like they had in the past, and while it left out possibilities of Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four and X-Men, essentially Marvel's most well-known and most suitable characters for adaptation, they did have some interesting characters in their arsenal. It was at this Comic-Con of 2006 when Marvel Studios, now president, was asked by a fan, could these characters ever cross over? Are we going to get the Avengers? To which Kevin Feige responded, who knows? This is a big new experiment for Marvel. But it's no coincidence that we have the rights to Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, Cap. These characters, along with Ant-Man and the Wasp, made up the initial team of the Avengers. While now it might seem like an obvious move or a foregone conclusion that these big universes should intertwine or cross over, it really wasn't back then. In fact, by 2007, the superhero genre was looking more tired than ever. Superman Returns had underperformed at the box office and was met with a tempered response the year prior. The X-Men and Spider-Man trilogies had finished and were met with a resounding derision and indifference respectively. Ghost Rider, a Marvel co-production, had been met with a negative response, as had Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. It was at a time when the movies based on superheroes were yielding worse returns at the box office and poor critical reaction. However, 2007 showed brief glimpses of promise for the future, with the promotion and teasing of The Dark Knight, but more importantly for the purposes of this feature, Iron Man. I remember really vividly back in 2007 when leaked Comic-Con footage for Iron Man appeared online, and we got our first look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it was grainy and impossible to hear over the screeching of fans in Hall H in San Diego. But the scope and look of the film was undeniable. It got people's interest, especially the shot of Tony taking on the fighter jets. We'd finally get to see the film in better quality, on a bigger screen, on May 2nd, 2008. Iron Man wasn't the most obvious choice to make a film about, but if for no other reason that he hadn't been adapted before, it suited what Marvel wanted to make. In the comics, he wasn't the most well-known or popular character. In fact, most people probably knew him best as a supporting character with the Avengers or in massive crossover stories. But he was an iconic character, and worked as a good antithesis to many of the other superheroes out there. While characters such as Batman, Spider-Man or Superman were better known, in Iron Man we had something that many other heroes didn't have at that time, and that was the fact that he kind of liked being a superhero. Tony isn't necessarily a man with a strong moral compass, or a compassion to do good, but he does have a sense of guilt, and perhaps the poetic irony of being almost killed by his own weapons gave him a sense of purpose, to do right for all the wrong he's no doubt done. He's essentially trying to wash the blood off his hands. When you try to compare him to other heroes, the obvious parallel is Bruce Wayne. However, Wayne has always been a damaged, unhappy individual who suffers greatly due to both his psychological drive to create a world where his parents wouldn't have been murdered, and because of the torment he faces for a sense of loss, and that he has a duty and an obligation to be the Batman. Tony doesn't have this. In fact, Tony Stark as a character that we often should and do hate. He's pampered and spoiled, he's rich through nefarious means, and rather than trying to do better in the world, he indulges himself in gambling, risk-taking, alcohol and women. He's a rock star, and as much as he can be grating, we somewhat envy him and his unmistakable charm. Where the character becomes interesting is when he is forced to re-examine his life. What will Stark's legacy ultimately be? And when he does try to move away from weaponry, and being this merchant of death, is when we find the soul of Tony Stark. Let's look at the film. Firstly, in the first Iron Man, the character is perfect. He's a bit of a prick, but he's cool and he's cocky, and we sort of end up liking him. I feel like the balance is lost in some of the later films, but in this first film at least, it's perfect. There's a real understated sense of realness to this movie too, and I feel it's often overlooked. You know, when it brings in real things such as terrorism and the war in Afghanistan. I think the only movie that would really come close to that later would be The Winter Soldier, and even that film, I think, might even be a bit less real than this one. It does a fantastic job of not cramming too much into the film to set up a universe, which lots of subsequent universes are guilty of. In fact, even subsequent Marvel movies are guilty of. But it does manage to set up S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers eventually in the post-credits. It focused mostly and importantly on establishing the character, who will be the linchpin of the MCU going forward. I think it's great that we forgo the secret identity too, as it seems just a little obvious that Iron Man will be Tony. For a film that's over a decade old now, the effects are still quite solid. It's been said a million times, but Robert Downey Jr. is just perfect in this role as well. Whatever else you say about Marvel, their casting is nearly always on point, and Robert Downey Jr. in my opinion stands as some of the best casting in superhero cinema. He's not entirely a good guy, and he has no problem killing those terrorists for the greater good and to keep people safe, but he's probably a bit more complex than the character gets credit for. Jeff Bridges does a good job, but as a villain he's a little bit formulaic. He's just a rival business guy, and of course you have that personal connection which makes him a little bit more interesting, but they really just throw him in so Iron Man will have someone to fight in the final act. And while it is a bit more interesting in that he is sort of a surrogate father figure, having the dark version, or the dark mirror version of the hero is something that would constantly plague Marvel in subsequent movies. Also, the War Machine nod is a little heavy-handed. Poor Terrence Howard didn't stand a chance of coming back, unfortunately. The spontaneity with which he announces his identity is also very fitting with the character. It's just a fantastic film. It came out the same year as The Dark Knight, so it got a little bit overshadowed. The performances are great, the film's well paced and entertaining, the action is good, and most importantly probably it nails the character Tony Stark, and it manages to set up a universe without feeling forced. Let's talk about Stan Lee cameo. Stan Lee cameo, it was early on of course, this was the first film in the MCU. He'd of course cameoed in a lot of Marvel movies before this, but he cameos in every MCU film. Some cameos later on and get a little bit too blatant or self-indulgent. This one is simple, perfect and funny. This is when it hadn't really been defined what a Stan Lee cameo would involve. He just shows up as Hugh Hefner, or he's mistaken for Hugh Hefner, which is just entertaining. As far as the end credit scene goes, you have to love it. It's the one that started it all, and simple, effective. It sets up the future of this universe so well. And it really blew people's minds back in the day. People were shocked about what happened in the credits and what it meant for this whole world of superheroes. They had a lot of rules for Marvel in my mind going forward. Having the hero face a dark version of themselves essentially as their villain. No secret identities for the most part. And on the other hand, there's things in this film that wouldn't be done in subsequent movies, including the sequel, possibly due to Disney intervention. The darker tone and more realistic basis would disappear entirely. Not a bad thing, but since you're going into an integrated universe where a man who is frozen in time, a Norse god and a giant monster, you know, and that's like phase one, it makes sense that the world will get a bit less real, I think. But it's hard to wonder if this film had stuck closer to that palette, if things would be different. It only makes sense that the first film would be so influential, especially because of how successful it was. But that same year we had a film that kind of subsequently became known as the black sheep of the MCU, The Incredible Hulk. The Incredible Hulk was released just 6 weeks later, which is absolute insanity to think about now. It's also the lowest grossing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the only one hero to date that has not gotten a sequel, or at least not had a sequel in development. So the big question is, why did this film fail? At least compared to Iron Man, it failed anyway. Well, for one, it came only 5 years after Ang Lee's Hulk, and a lot of people didn't really like that film. And this film didn't do a good job of distinguishing that this was a new entry. Galen Hurd, who was a producer on this film, even said they couldn't quite figure out how to term it. It's kind of a reboot and kind of a sequel. In fact, the film more or less lines up with how the first Hulk film ends. It's also a bit of a messy film production-wise, especially as Edward Norton was apparently quite involved with rewrites and trying to change the film, a reputation he's had on a lot of films. So it no doubt made things difficult with a film that had to take part in the larger universe. I know there was a lot of dispute and argument over who should get a credit for it, and Edward Norton didn't get a credit in the end. I think the film is fascinating in that it sort of lays the groundwork for the things the Marvel Universe wouldn't do. We get a quick abridged and assumed origin story. Music is pretty good and quite simple, including integrating music from the original TV series. It pays quite an homage to the show in general in a few scenes. Something that probably makes it a bit better in Marvel movies is that score, in my opinion. Because a lot of times the music in Marvel movies comes under fire. Cinematography and lighting is better in a lot of Marvel movies too. And maybe the film just took a few risks, and after it failed, Marvel learned to play it a bit more safe. It also seems like they released these films so close to see what audiences would respond to, because they are quite different. Then we have Tim Roth. His performance is a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes he's a bit flat, and then other scenes he's very menacing. Liv Tyler is also quite forgettable as Betty Ross. She doesn't have many scenes that she actually gets to act in her defense, but just doesn't have a lot of chemistry, unfortunately. Also, the effects in this movie. Yikes. Like, these effects weren't even very good at the time. And especially any scenes with hard lighting, or even the rain scenes, or especially that in that lab scene, the effects just do not look very good at all. On the other hand, you have something like the violence in this movie is a bit more intense than a lot of the other Marvel movies. Like, he cripples a dude by punching him into a tree. I feel Marvel would really tone that down. Another example of how this film set the standard for what you don't do. There's some real brutality to the action scenes, actually, in this movie. And I will say I do like the final fight scene. It's over the top and ridiculous, but it's a bit of a guilty pleasure. It gets the level of destruction perfect. Harlem is wrecked in this fight. And we get lots of different settings and environmental moments as Hulk and Abomination fight. That being said, I'm not a big fan of the Abomination design. Probably the least faithful design in the MCU. And even that aside, it's just a really lazy looking design. The big CGI fight, as much as it is a guilty pleasure, it does look quite ugly at times as well. Let's talk about Ed Norton's performance as the Hulk, the only performance he'd ever make as the Hulk character. I think it's good overall. He's a little bit more reserved in the emotional scenes. Hulk he portrays is a bit different to Ruffalo's Hulk. Norton plays a character whereby he seems to have a constant anger and rage just below the surface. There's a real intensity to his performance. Whereas Ruffalo plays Banner as calm and in control to widen the contrast between him and his alter ego. Personally, I prefer Ruffalo, but I do think Norton suits the tone of this movie, and that he probably could have been a good Hulk in general moving forward. I'll also say I like the last shot in the movie, when he seems to be in control of the Hulk, which is something we don't really get in the other films. Closing, I find the film to be a bit of a mixed bag. Gets more hate than it deserves. Has some good elements that it rarely gets credit for, but it's also a mostly forgettable film. Just looks a lot cheaper than the rest of the Marvel films. It's a shame that this film has been cast out as much as it has. The only character to ever return from it is William Hurt as Thunderbolt Ross, and he's great in that role. I just wish that we could have followed through on some sequels. Red Hulk, the leader, or even eventually the Thunderbolts. It seems like there's a whole Hulk universe that has gone unexplored. As much as see a character that they can only seem to get right as part of an ensemble. Let's talk about the Stan Lee cameo, probably the briefest cameo I can think of. He drinks an infected soda. You know, there's not a lot of pizzazz to this one. Again, it feels like they were at a time where they were trying to figure out what a Stan Lee cameo would involve. Nothing, normally from here on out, it's like a quick joke or kind of a wink to the audience. Also, one for the table quiz here. The Incredible Hulk is the only Marvel film with no post-credit scene. Technically, it does have a scene that most people think of as a post-credit scene, but it happens before the credits. In that we get a very heavy-handed attempt at world building and sequel bait. Something Marvel might steer away from in general moving forward. It involves Tony Stark approaching Thunderbolt Ross in a bar, mentioning the possibility that he's trying to put a team together. Presumably this team is the Avengers. And I also believe it's unclear at that time whether he's looking to hire Abomination or Hulk. In fact, it's probably more likely he's trying to get Abomination, because Abomination, I believe, is in their captivity at that point. The Incredible Hulk is a bit of a strange movie. At times it shows an incredible restraint, and it comes at a time when the Marvel formula was a bit less defined. It wasn't as clear. And I feel like because of that, it sort of struggles, and it's so different to the other movies that that's a problem, especially looking back. I think it has moments overall. It's a film that probably lands in the lower tier though of the Marvel movies overall, which probably will be joined by the next film in the series, Iron Man 2. This is the film, I think, where Marvel became Marvel, as at least the Marvel we know, for better or worse. It seems like there's a more focused film here at one point. It might have been the first time where Marvel actually would meddle to the detriment of their product, which was actually at one point seemingly a trend. That might be the worst example of this, actually. While later films can be accused of a director working within the constraints of the Marvel Universe, but at times losing their kind of creative voice. I think that's a complaint that doesn't always have merit, but maybe in some of the solo films certainly, because they want to make sure these characters get done right. However, in Iron Man 2, Marvel probably learned from a lot of their mistakes they made here. In fact, there is a lot wrong with this movie, and I think they learned from it going forward. So for one, this film was incredibly rushed, coming out almost 2 years later. And that means the whole process, developing it, writing it. Iron Man 2 moved forward without a script in place. Now, if you listen to the talk at the time, the first Iron Man ran without a script at times, with plenty of on-the-fly rewrites. But I feel like you can see it in this film. In fact, I kind of actually forgotten at one point that the film was working without a script at times, and I actually made a note that some scenes felt really improvised, and it's very evident going forward. I think a lot of the time it doesn't work. Marvel interfered a lot with this movie. It actually seems like Favreau had plans for a trilogy, but most importantly was that this movie was said to have inspired Demon in a Bottle, which is probably one of the Iron Man's most famous stories. And it was essentially just Tony's battle with alcoholism, and that just doesn't really sell toys, does it? This is what had changed in between Iron Man 1 and 2, is that Marvel were bought by Disney, and it seems like things got lightened up quite a bit as a result. And while Favreau was denied this, it was the intention to adapt the Demon in a Bottle story. The alternate opening sort of begs to differ, beginning with Tony hungover and throwing up in a toilet. And his previous comments make it seem like he is playing pseudo politics as opposed to telling the actual truth. Then there's the cramming of other storylines and the setup for the Avengers into this movie that were also apparently forced, making quite a strained relationship between Favreau, Downey Jr. and Disney. In fact, for a time, it looked like Favreau was going to direct the Avengers, but this film made created such a bad blood between Disney and Favreau that obviously didn't happen. And while they would reconcile later, the truth is that for a time at least, it seemed like Marvel kind of had a director problem. Like a lot of directors were alienated or had creative disagreements with the studio. I mean, I might get to that in a few of the later films. Favreau's chef is actually seen as something of a metaphor for working with Marvel, in that the kind of joy of being independent and not having to follow the orders of the boss man. So we're getting a bit off track there, but you understand what I'm saying. It's a strange film that kind of felt the pressure of the new boss of Disney, and felt like there was a lot of compromises made to try to get to the Avengers. But we'll talk about that a bit now. I think a lot of people already know that this film has its issues. It's mainly awkward world building, in my opinion. The fact is they wanted to get to the Avengers relatively quickly, and some movie had to bear the bulk of the setup to get there on time. And obviously they put it in a sequel that people would see anyway. You know, you couldn't put all this world building in Thor or Captain America because those movies wouldn't succeed. But if you put it in an Iron Man sequel, the Iron Man sequel is going to make money anyway. So why not put it there when you have less of a character to build on, because Tony's already been established in the first movie. I felt like Tony kind of becomes very grating in this film. More so than the first one anyway. He goes a bit far, or at least the movie goes a bit far to make him seem cool. In fact, he's fairly unlikable at times. What worked really well with the first film is that we had a character who has everything, money and looks and power, and he has to finally face some hardship, and he changes because of it. But here he kind of just goes back to being what he was initially, which is this rich jerk who doesn't really face a lot of consequences. And while you could say Vanko is making him answer for those sins as a physical threat, Tony never really he doesn't seem troubled by him. Then there is that one scene where he gets attacked on the racetrack, obviously. I mean, Tony actually kind of manages to handle him fairly well without the suit, at least initially. Stark is never really called on his shit by anyone around him. It even works out for him a lot of the time. Like, it's strange to see him in the Senate and everyone just thinks he's hilarious. I think the film is just a bit too jokey and light at times when it shouldn't be. Then there's Mickey Rourke, who I think just bottles it as a villain. He's rubbish in my opinion. On every count, it's just not any good. The intro at the racetrack is a good scene, and I think it's good that he has a personal connection to Tony, but they don't really ever make the most of it. It feels like Mickey Rourke thought his job was to give this massive award-worthy performance, but he just overdoes it and it comes off as laughable in its earnestness. Not to mention the language barrier makes it even more awkward, because we have scenes where dialogue has to be repeated, and also doesn't allow the character to be very menacing, as he has very little to say as a result. Like, the scene I always think of is, we have a scene where he has a scene with Justin Hammer, and they're trying to make these drones. And basically what we have to get across is that Hammer wants robots that he can put men inside. Van Gogh starts making drones, and it goes on for about 10 minutes, and it's just back and forth of, where's the head go here? Where Van Gogh, where's the head go? No head, drone is better. No head, drone is better. No head, drone. It just goes back and forth for minutes with very little dialogue. And granted, there's a few jokes in there, but it's just unnecessary. It seems like stalling. And apparently Rourke did a lot of research for this role, and he's really annoyed at Marvel and Disney for butchering his performance, but it's just not a great performance. There's not much you can hang on to here, in my opinion. It's just too over the top, and I don't think he realizes how over the top he's playing it. One of the few noteworthy additions, and definitely a welcome addition, is Sam Rockwell as Justin Hammer. He's really funny and annoying. Kind of wish we got more of him, actually. I think the only appearance he made aside from this was in a Marvel one-shot. Overall, this film is an example of a lot of things Marvel would be accused of later on. They're probably guilty of it, and that's overdoing the humour and undercutting the movie, or some of the more serious aspects of the movie because of it. Also, the hero-villain interaction in this film is probably the worst in the MCU. They meet once, early on, briefly interact, and then they don't see each other again until, well, sorry, they have a conversation on the phone to remind each other that they hate each other. But aside from that, they don't see each other till the end of the film. There's some interesting idea in what Van Gogh says, where he says, if you could make God bleed, people will cease to believe in him. But nothing really comes of that. Tony doesn't really seem weak until he basically just forgets about him until later on in the movie. And it kind of almost implies that Van Gogh might make him look fallible, and because of that more threats will come out of the woodwork, but it never really happens. It's a strange movie for how much it tries to cram in, but the actual scenes then feel very flat, like I said, they feel improvised. There's a real sense of the film being rushed from scene to scene, but then on the other hand, scenes are just dragged out, sometimes for comedic effect. There's just not a very good balance. Like I mentioned the scene already with Hammer and Van Gogh going on with drones, and it really only needs to get one point across, but it goes on for a long time. Or there's another scene where Hammer is showing off his artillery, and it goes on for a long time. He's just talking about these weapons, bigging up these weapons, and the only point it needs to get across is that he's working to help build War Machine and selling weapons to Rhodey. But it goes on forever. It sets up one bad joke at the end of the movie, but it just feels like the movie's stalling or something. The biggest problem with this movie is how much is crammed into it. So just let's count the storylines here. We have Tony's alcoholism, birth of War Machine, introduction of Black Widow, Tony is dying / inventing a new element, Whiplash and a hammer, and you could probably put those in separate categories if you want, and the setup to the Avengers. So we have at least 5 to 6 major stories going on in this movie. Because of that, the villain story in the film gets rushed at the beginning because they won't have time to develop it in the second act, and then they just come back to it at the end, it's just a weird holding pattern for a lot of the movie. It's ridiculous. The villain team up comes way too early because the film gets so focused on those other storylines in the middle of the movie. Then let's look at, for example, just how flawed this movie is. So within the course of a few minutes, at the end of we get the end of Tony's parody scene, which has the story of Tony's alcoholism and his illness, War Machine becoming War Machine, then Nick Fury gets reintroduced, then they reveal Black Widow to be, well, Black Widow, which, like, that should tell you how bloated this movie is. In the space of a couple of minutes, we get all that stuff thrown at us, and none of them have to do with anything. I also say, I don't really get why Black Widow reveals herself. There's no need for her to reveal that she's Black Widow at that point. If you needed S.H.I.E.L.D. to have an agent there, that's what Coulson is there for. In fact, he's introduced like in the next scene. I also will say that in this film, I don't really like the characterization of Nick Fury. It's basically a bit too over the top, just like he's just Samuel L. Jackson, basically. It's hard to buy him as an actual serious super spy like in some of the later movies. Storylines just start and stop constantly in this movie. In the whole middle of the movie, there's very little to get interested in. It throws a lot of different storylines at us, some out of nowhere, to pad the movie and set up the future. I don't think the visual effects in this are worse than the first one. Like, the first one, the effects aren't that bad, but in this movie, there's a lot of effects where you just go, oof, it's pretty ugly. If I had to highlight a few positives, I think Black Widow's fight scene towards the end of the movie is pretty good. That's a good introduction for the character overall. The scene with Rhodey and Tony fighting the bots is actually pretty good at the end. You know, it's a movie that doesn't have a lot of action at times, and when it finally wakes up with that action, it's quite good. Then again, the final clash with Van Gogh is pretty disappointing. kind of seems odd at the very end of the movie that Tony and Pepper are just having this big argument on a roof, even though there's like explosions going off everywhere. Like, shouldn't Tony be like checking on these people? Or even War Machine is there as well, just looking at them. I think they try to help people. Another positive I would say is Gary Shandling. He's got a really small role, but he's really funny, especially his last line where he's like pinning the badge on him and he goes like, how annoying a little prick can be, or something to that effect, which is great. You know, rest in peace, Gary Shandling. He was fantastic. I also think Don Cheadle makes a far better War Machine than Terrence Howard. I think he's not as over the top, and even though I suppose in this film it probably could have been a bit more over the top. There's just also a lot of weird appearances in this movie. Like Olivia Munn is there for like 2 seconds as a reporter for some reason. I guess just a cameo or whatever. Kate Mara is there for 10 seconds. And what's weirder about that is, I remember her out and about promoting this movie. I saw her on a talk show promoting Iron Man 2. And all she does is when he gets called to the Senate. Like, Elon Musk has a really awkward cameo. It's really shoehorned. And also, technically, I guess now they've retconned it so that Peter Parker in this movie, because there's a kid in an Iron Man helmet that pretends to shoot a bot, and Tony shoots him up and says, "Good job, kid." And they said that's Peter Parker now, which that's unnecessary. Whatever. But then we have our Stan Lee cameo. Stan Lee, it's kind of a bit like the first one. We just see a little glimpse of him, and they take him for Larry King. You know, nice little short joke, bit of a subtle one. Then we have the post-credit scene, which is Thor's hammer, and it's funny, I didn't realise that this shot actually appears again in Thor. And sometimes with these post-credit scenes, you like think, oh, who filmed that? And straight away, there's no mistaking this one, because it's shot at a Dutch angle. So you're like, oh, that's Kenneth Branagh, because Thor is full of Dutch angles. In closing, I think Iron Man 2 is a mess, and has the real unfortunate burden of having to set up so much of the universe in the lead up to the Avengers, which is unnecessary. I mean, a lot of the people went into the Avengers blind and they were fine with it. And this film was just rushed, and most of it didn't work. It's definitely one of the worst Marvel movies. I think if you watch it in a marathon, it's not the worst because all the setup links into the next film, but it doesn't really stand on its own legs. The villain sucks. The other leads give okay performances, even though most of them were better in the first film. It just seems like this was a missed opportunity that was sacrificed for the sake of universe building. It's a shame when people always like joke and make fun of Warner Bros. And DC, but for rushing to Justice League, but this was a pretty big rush, and it's very evident. I think. I don't think it's as bad as some of the DC films. Like, I'm not gonna review the DC movies now, not for a while at least. It suffers from a lot of avoidable problems, and we end up with a bland, forgettable sequel, which is disappointing because of how great the first one is, and they just try to cram too much into it and they try to rush this movie, and that's where it fell down completely. The following summer we get the next 2 entries in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The first one was Thor. Thor was an interesting one for Marvel. Those who knew his comics often only knew some of the absurdity of it all, the cape and winged helmet, or the Shakespearean grandiose dialogue and that silly rainbow bridge. And while that is certainly a factor, he's been made fascinating in many comic series for his sheer strength and power and immortality. The exploration of what such power and longevity has often made many characters interesting to study. Dr. Manhattan and Superman, for example, come to mind. And while this film mostly gives us that former, it is an interesting movie. Of course, the fact it ties into well-known Norse mythology helped to be such a success at the box office. It's a film that people normally dismiss, but it's not without merit. And with a comic and often silly premise from the outside, it's kind of shocking how well this film actually works. I love the look of the movie, and the effects are pretty good too. The costume and production design does a great job of making Asgard look not ridiculous. It doesn't really get enough credit for that, in my opinion. They actually make it look intricate and elaborate. The look of Asgard in general is just stunning. It has a mythical but not unbelievable quality to its world. Comparatively, say, look at a movie like Man of Steel. I don't hate that movie, and granted we only get a little bit of Krypton at the start, but the world they show us there doesn't look believable or livable. It might look suitably sci-fi from a design perspective, but it doesn't look like logical or habitable world. I do find sometimes that this film Hemsworth's delivery is a little bit off. I think he's growing into the role a little bit. However, the guy looks like Thor ripped straight from the comics. Except maybe the awkward dyed beard and eyebrows he has in this first film. That was a weird creative choice. The over-the-top theatricality of it all strikes a good balance between sincere and silly. And for a movie that should be an absolute mess, it works quite well on many counts. Remember the Warriors 3 they're introduced in this film? And they go on about their adventures, but we get none of those in the film. And what's surprising mostly is that this is probably the film where they're used the best. But we'll get to those films later on. We only see one realm properly in this movie. The opening. home of the frost giants. It's not a bad world, but we don't really get to see much of it. But there's some nice creative touches. I like how the frost giants form ice blades on their hand, and it's a shame we don't see more of the Nine Realms in these movies. It's also a shame is that the movie starts by showing us these mystical lands, and then the Earth stuff, which really sucks for the most part, is where we spend a good chunk of our movie. The Earth stuff is just so goofy. Some of the jokes work, but does such a good job of establishing Asgard and the mystical realm side of it, that when you get to Earth, you can't help but feel a bit disappointed. I think the writers think that the science team are a lot quirkier and funnier than they really are. Stellan Skarsgård has a few moments, but Kat Dennings is awful and grating. Her character in general just sort of stinks. She's an awkward comedic relief character. There is some good jokes. Natalie Portman and co decide they're going to go search for Thor, and they go out and get ready for this big adventure, and then he just randomly reverse and hit him. Or when Thor smashes his mug on the floor and shouts another. You know, it has a few moments where the humour works on Earth. Thor is perfect for fish out of water comedy, and a lot of the time it does work in that regard. I used to feel like this film didn't do a great job of establishing Loki, but I think I'm pretty wrong about that looking back and rewatching this. They show us that he's sneaky, but he does love his brother. It really does nail the complex side of his character, and his relationship with Odin and Thor is well done. And it shows the anguish he has about his identity as not being Odin's real son. And he's a complex character too. He invites Loki, the king of the Frost Giants, Asgard, only to kill him. It's a plan we don't fully follow. It's complex that way. The dynamic between Thor and Loki is good too. He's like a more subtle villain in the first film. I feel like Hiddleston settles into the role a lot more in the Avengers though. Same with Hemsworth. Maybe it was the direction, I don't know. They kind of ignore Loki being a frost giant a bit in the later movies as well, really, for the most part. But anyway, more subtle connections to the wider universe really work in this movie as well. Like there's references to Banner and Stark. They work really well. In fact, some of them you wouldn't even notice if you hadn't seen the other movies. Costumes as well are really faithful and they work incredibly well. It's actually just really impressive that they don't look ludicrous. I kind of wish we saw more of them, especially the helmets, Thor and Loki's especially. The fact that they even got them in the movie is impressive, like the winged helmet or Loki's horned helmet. On the other hand, like, you couldn't give Hawkeye one action scene, man. Come on, really? No wonder like people are always disrespecting Hawkeye, you know? Just give him, like, they have a scene with Hawkeye in it and they give his big fight to this random beefy security guard. Why not just give that to Hawkeye? You know, come on. They clearly just wanted to have a scene with Hawkeye grabbing his bow so people would make the connection, but most people probably had no clue he was until after they saw the Avengers. Poor Hawkeye just never gets the respect he deserves, really. I hope he gets his moment to shine in Endgame, actually, because I do like Hawkeye. Would it have even made the Avengers even more interesting if they had fought, you know? It seems like a bit of a missed opportunity in my opinion. I would say visually I do like his introduction though. The lighting and the rain and him kind of zipping up in the sniper's nest is quite cool looking, to be fair. Although you have to kind of question why they even needed Barton there to begin with. Like, just the security. I mean, he's just a guy with a bow. There's loads of soldiers there. I know he's meant to be really good at all this, but if they're expecting Thor to show up, they have an army there anyway. And if they know Thor is depowered, which they don't know anyway, they don't know what they're dealing with really. But anyway, just, you know, let Hawkeye do something distinctive. Here he's just like a random soldier, unless you know otherwise or happen to recognize Jeremy Renner. Or, well, there's no need to get annoyed about it now. I suppose time has gone by. I think we can get over it. But anyway, the explanation of the realms in general is kind of simple and effectively done. The whole science and magic aspect are simple. They're the same on Asgard, and that works really well. And it's quite an understated job of making the world of Asgard and the Thor character more adaptable to the wider MCU. Natalie Portman is pretty much wasted in this film. She's okay. Like, she has nothing to do. I know some people don't think she's much of an actress. I think she's quite good, but her chemistry and relationship with Thor is just nothing. I mean, it's basically just, you're hot, and that it never really gets beyond that, really. The last act of the movie is a lot of fun. Has a lot of action on Earth. There's personal stakes in Asgard, and it's very well orchestrated. Also, just a fun fact, if you're interested, the destroyer on Earth in Thor is later repurposed into the gun that Coulson fires at Loki in the first Avengers movie. That's just why it's so effective against them. There you go, a bit of a tidbit if you're interested. They swap positions as well from the beginning of the movie from a moral perspective. Like, and that really shows the actual length of and strength, I suppose, to a certain degree, of Thor's arc, where initially Thor wanted to, you know, destroy the Frost Giants, and now he wants to save them. And it kind of puts a good contrast between Thor and Loki, and it shows, again, just how good of a villain Loki is in the MCU. It shows that there's really not much of a stretch between him being a villain and being, you know, someone with the traits of Thor, who we just met. Even if it's another example of like a dark mirror version of a hero, it's a bit more complex and probably more intelligent to a certain degree. Not to mention that the personal stakes of them being brothers and the fact that Loki gets a chance to develop and grow over the course of the movies. I think that makes it a lot more substantial than a lot of those villains. The ending has a really surprising kind of emotional heft. Thor sacrificing his only link to Jane for the greater good. Even though the love story isn't perfect in the movie, and the ending is a bit undermined by the Avengers, where Thor just gets easily to Earth anyway. It's quite a somber ending, and just a little glimmer of hope. It kind of reminds me of the ending of The Empire Strikes Back in that way. I mean, that's a pretty lofty comparison, but you know what I mean. I do think Loki's death could have been handled a little bit better from a visual and emotional perspective. He just sort of awkwardly floats and then turns in and disappears into the abyss. I think he could have been, directed a bit better, just to give it a bit of a bigger impact there. Then again, this is his first of many death scenes. Rene Russo's in this. She's totally wasted, but I think people don't seem to care that much about that. Anyway, I do like the last shots of the movie, the side profile that we get of Odin and Thor as they look over Asgard. It's a nice visual. I think the visuals on Asgard are particularly strong in this movie. Well, anyway, what about our Stan Lee cameo? The guy that tries to move the hammer with his truck. It's probably one of the cameos where a Stan Lee cameo became what we know it as now, which is a joke, a gratuitous, obvious, like, shots away, like, hey, that's Stan Lee. And then moving on. Which is what it would be for most of them moving forward. Our post-credit scene, we see that Loki is alive and influencing Dr. Selvig to get close to the Tesseract. I really wish that they hadn't revealed that Loki was alive, but I guess I understand the need for the scene overall. And it was always going to be apparent once the Avengers started marketing that he was alive anyway, so it's probably not that big a deal. And it is an important step in establishing the Avengers somewhat, but not terribly exciting in its own right. Overall, I think this is a film that deserves a bit more credit. It manages to establish what, at that point in the MCU, was its biggest risk-taking, a character as strange and weird as Thor, and making it work. It manages to get Asgard right, including the weirder elements, like the Rainbow Bridge and the Nine Realms. When it comes to the characters, it also does a good job of getting Thor and Loki, their abilities and their relationship right. In fact, that is what makes this film a bit of a letdown. It gets the more difficult aspects correct, and manages to make them interesting. And then the easier parts on Earth, the love interest, the comic relief characters, kind of gets those wrong. Sure, there's a few good fish out of water jokes, but once the movie gets started, it finds itself stalling. And that's annoying because of the stuff before it was so good. I think the film is better than most people give it credit for, but it's also not a great movie. That same year, of course, we would get the next entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the last one before we got to the Avengers, which was Captain America, the First Avenger. It came out the same summer as Thor, and it was a modest success. Captain America was a character that a lot of people knew by notoriety as opposed to anything else. Seen as something of a Boy Scout and a symbol of corny American patriotism. In fact, some people had concerns about calling the film Captain America as it alienated people outside of America, or seemed like more of a celebration of the USA than anything else. This is what some people suggest is the reason for the addition of the subtitle of The First Avenger, to remind audiences that this wasn't just a film about Steve Rogers, but about the man commonly positioned as the leader of the Avengers, and that this film would do plenty to set up for Marvel's superhero team-up. It really doesn't do that, but it does do a great job of defining a character that would be pivotal to the MCU. This film divides people a little bit. Some love it, others dislike it or feel indifferent to it. I go a bit back and forth on it. I love lots of it, but other pieces then are a little bit meh. I think the first half of the film is very, very solid. Captain America's origin and him getting his powers are incredibly well done, especially for a character that often comes off as goofy. We really get a sense of who Steve Rogers is as a man before he becomes Captain America. It's summed up in his line where he's asked if he wants to kill Nazis, and he replies, "I don't want to kill anyone. I don't like bullies." He's a character whose greatest strength was always his strong moral compass, an obligation to do what's right. Steve has a good heart, and that's always what has made him interesting. In fact, in later movies, it is when he is forced to question his sense of morality and duty or obligation to his country or planet that the character shines. I also love the aesthetic of the movie. The way it blends future tech with the 1940s is great, and I really like 1940s New York and the costumes they use. It all looks impressive and fantastic. I also like how they pay homage to the comics and manage to get sillier aspects of the character in there. They perfectly manage to explain why Captain America wears the outfit, and even manage to get a nod to him punching Hitler in. It's really well done overall. The love interest, Peggy Carter, is easily the best in any of the movies to date, and maybe even in a lot of the subsequent movies. She's funny, charming, strong, and gorgeous. Her chemistry with Steve is also really genuine, and it makes the ending of the film quite sad. Especially that final line by Chris Evans where he just says, "I had a date." It's like he just finally realised all that he's lost in that moment, especially the possible love of his life. For me though, the first hour is strong, and in the second hour it falls down quite a bit. I wish the Red Skull was a little bit more menacing. I do like how they tease his appearance, but I'd love if him and Cap got a bit more interaction. Tommy Lee Jones is good in his short role, showing a more comedic side than usual, as is Stanley Tucci. It's a shame we can't see some more of these characters. The film does a good job though of establishing the character of Captain America, and Chris Evans immediately gets the role and kills it. I like the movie quite a bit, even though I think the first half is better, but it really is mostly there to explain how Captain America gets to the present day. I just wish the second half was a little better. The movie has a degree of campiness in it too, without coming across as corny. It suits the older time period of the movie. Sebastian Stan does fine, but he has a very slight role in this film, as do the rest of the Howling Commandos. Of course, Sebastian Stan would later return to the MCU. I think the latter half of the film rushes a little bit to get us to the ending, so Steve can be put in the modern day. And there's a lot going on in the movie, and as much as it has flaws, it's a film that I find enjoyable. I think if I had to pick a film from the Marvel Universe to throw on without doing a marathon of the whole MCU, this one would probably be towards the top of the list. More so than the previous films, save for Iron Man. How about that Stan Lee cameo? This is actually one that was a bit more controversial, because Stan Lee had nothing to do with the creation of Captain America, even though he helped revive the character in the 60s. While original creator Joe Simon was alive at the time, he was 98 and couldn't even make the premiere of the film, and would die before the end of that year. He did get to see the film and the character recreated though before he died. Stan Lee, however, has created every character in the MCU that has got to a film save for Captain America, and has been pivotal to it all, so I feel it's pretty acceptable to put him in, especially as he's so vital to Marvel as a brand. It's quite charming to see Stan Lee dressed up as a general. He often referred to himself as the Generalissimo, so I like to think that's a nod to this. He simply says that he thought Captain America would be taller to a character when looking at someone who clearly isn't Captain America. One of the favourite cameos, I'd say. It's really simple, but it works incredibly well. Then we have the end credit scene, which is probably a weaker one in some ways, as the end credit scene is literally just a trailer for the Avengers. It's a short scene where Fury approaches Cap and he's hitting the heavy bag, which is from the film, and then they just play the trailer, and you know, it seems a bit lazier, but I'm not going to lie, the trailer for that still gets me hyped. It's a bit less subtle compared to the other end credits, and that's kind of saying something considering how heavy-handed some of the other ones are. Overall, I think Captain America is a film I think a lot of people skipped at the time, maybe because it seemed unnecessary. People didn't really see the connection between this whole universe and the character in the 40s. That being said, it's a film I enjoyed quite a bit, possibly even one of the more underrated films of the MCU. And I think without a doubt the Captain America trilogy is the strongest series of films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, we're getting ahead of ourselves. I do wish the latter half was as captivating or as well done as the first part. I think it's a case where things need to be rushed to create a villain conflict, establish more characters, and eventually get Cap to the modern era for the next film. That next film, of course, being The Avengers. One of the biggest films and events of all time. Even though some of the returns and reception to previous Marvel movies that set up the Avengers were middling, everyone seemed to be on board for this movie. In fact, until Avengers Infinity War last year, this was still the biggest movie in the MCU. It's now the 6th highest grossing movie of all time, and when it was released it was actually the 3rd highest grossing film of all time. This was Marvel's big bet, and while there was some stumbles along the way, this film knocked it out of the park. Not just commercially. Critically, Joss Whedon's film was lauded, critics loved it, audiences ate it up. It was a monster success. And in the wake of this, every studio in Hollywood was searching their properties to make their own cinematic universe. You already know that this film was, and still is, a great movie, maybe even the ultimate popcorn film. So let's take a look at Marvel's The Avengers. I love the opening of this movie. It's fantastic. It does a great job of setting the tone and establishing S.H.I.E.L.D., including Coulson and Maria Hill, Loki and the Tesseract. The character of Loki is much better defined in this one too. Recently there was like a sort of a revelation where Marvel said that Loki was being influenced by the Scepter during this attack, and that was, people were touting on the internet as like a big deal, but it seems pretty obvious, especially in this first scene. He looks insane and almost possessed by it. And when we see the Scepter influence Banner later on, possibly even the team as a whole, there should be little doubt about its corrupting influences. And we'd later learn why Loki's Scepter could mind control people, but we'll talk about that when we get to a later film. As well as a neat little action and a chase scene. It's nothing groundbreaking, it just does a good job of laying out all the pieces and the need for the Avengers to assemble. I must say as well, I'm a sucker for a good character introduction, and this movie does a fantastic job of introducing each character by themselves, and does a good job of showing us who each one is for the uninitiated. Black Widow and Thor especially, who are characters that either didn't get much development or we didn't get to see their full capabilities respectively. In fact, this film can really stand on its own without seeing the prior films, even though it's best enjoyed that way. Also, the humour is very well done, but at times it's a bit maybe overdone. It's a film that's cheesy and corny, but it embraces it to make it suitably comic booky, and in reveling that, we're reminded to just have fun with the film. It's heavy-handed and silly, but it's awesome at the same time because of it. Like, for example, Iron Man playing his own theme as he goes to confront Loki. It's ridiculous, but it's entertaining and it makes sense in the context of the film and for the character. Some of the dialogue is a little bit on the nose at times, but this is obviously not a film for subtlety. I do think there are some lines or terms that kind of needle me a bit though. The whole red in the ledger thing and how Banner keeps calling Hulk the other guy. I don't know if Disney just didn't like the idea of saying a character had blood on their hands, or if Whedon just didn't want to say the Hulk over and over again and couldn't find a replacement, but yeah, those lines come off a little awkward, in my opinion. Speaking of awkward moments, how about that moment where Banner reveals that he tried to kill himself but the Hulk spat the bullet out? Like, ugh, that comes out of nowhere. And it's handled with, well, all the subtlety of a bullet to the head. But it's a good, powerful revelation. I just think it could have been executed better. It doesn't really suit the rest of the tone of the film. And it's actually a callback to a deleted opening scene for The Incredible Hulk. And in that scene, we get an Easter egg of a frozen Captain America being shifted in the ice as Banner hulks out nearby. So this wasn't canon, but then it mentions it in the Avengers, so maybe it's canon. So possibly the Hulk is responsible for making Captain America be discovered in the ice, but that's a little tenuous, I don't know. It has a lot of small moments as well, aside from obviously the big set pieces, and like fans wanted to see things like a three-way fight between Thor and Captain America, the characters interacting, or the heli character, and having their morals conflict with each other. Whedon understands comic book logic though, rather well actually. We want to see the good guys fight, if only for a minute, because that's what we always imagine and debate about, which hero can beat which hero. And in doing so, we get to see their strengths and what makes them unique. For example, the Iron Man and Thor fight. We see how what each character can do and how logically they can stack up to each other. For example, Thor has lightning, so Tony can convert that to energy. Tony has an impenetrable metal helmet. Thor has an impenetrable skull of a god. Whedon just gets these characters. I think this film has really established what these characters would be like going forward. And that wasn't needed for the case of someone like Tony Stark, but for the likes of Thor, Hulk, Nick Fury, Black Widow, and maybe Captain America to a lesser degree. I think that was needed, especially for people who hadn't followed these characters, or characters that were less defined in previous films. But this one did a perfect job of setting those characters as stone for the coming years in the MCU. Take for example Loki and Thor having a heart-to-heart before the fight in the woods. We get their relationship, well documented, brothers who love each other despite betrayals and violence between them. We get Thor's connection to Earth and his sense of regality, and from Loki we see his outlook on humanity, all in a brief moment between two action beats. So if you didn't know anything about Thor or Loki, that's all you need. You can walk into this film blind and that sets it up. Same with Black Widow's scene in Russia sums her up really well. Or a line from Cap that suits him as well. Tells us exactly who he is. When he says, "There's only one God, ma'am," and I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that. We all know straight away from that he's an all-American who believes in one God and is mannerly and respectful as a person. Even before that, he is told he should sit this one out and replies that he doesn't know if he can. It's perfect. It's a short scene. We already see that a character has a strong sense of morality and subscribes to traditional American values. And that's what I'm talking about. Brief moments that show us who these characters are without meandering from the action or the flow of the story. And what's handy about this is people who watch it, having not seen any of the Zola films, will understand these characters quickly because of Whedon's writing. And you could probably attack the film for the story being so simple. I feel like the middle section does drag a bit. There's a lot of setup, but it's such a joy seeing these characters interact that it doesn't become much of an issue. I mean, if you're a geek or a nerd, mind is just blown that these characters are sharing the screen and getting to talk to each other, and if you're not, the humour is enough to draw you in from that perspective. So how do we get out of this middle act and into the end game where our Avengers are on the one page? And that's the death of a character. Coulson, or, well, Son of Cole, as one of my best subtle jokes in the first Thor film where he calls Coulson Son of Cole. Clark Gregg appeared in a lot of the Phase 1 films at the start. It's subtle enough that you might not even notice it, unless you're on a rewatch. But the good thing is that they do give him enough screen time in this film that his death will have an impact. While the character would be revived in Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., his initial death would give the Avengers something to push them in the right direction. Although I do want to talk about a moment I always thought was kind of weird, where We find out that he like this whole movie is talking about these Captain America trading cards, and when he dies, Nick Fury throws the cards and they're stained in blood and says like he's dead, for it's like a dramatic emphasis. And then Maria Hill comes up to him and says those were in his locker. I just think it's really funny that he was like, I need something dramatic here, so he went to his locker, got his cards, dipped them in fake blood, and threw them at the Avengers, and he was like, yeah, that'll work. Anyway, whatever else you say about this film, the last act, or the Battle of New York as it's known, is just a blast, and we keep getting extra little crinkles to make it interesting again. First it's only a few aliens, and then we have the Hulk gets introduced, but we get to see what he does at his full capacity. The number of villains grows even more. Then there's a nuke coming. It all comes together in a satisfying way, seeing our heroes work together and play off each other so well, where they use what makes them unique, and we get plenty of glamour shots and fan service too. It's a film where there's like so much humour, and it's consistently entertaining, and even though some of the jokes lose their sheen on repeat viewings, we still even get a bit of a chuckle out of them. What does hold up is the character interactions and the action shots. While the cinematography in general is a little bit flat, the money shots of the Avengers being assembled, or the shot that circles around them, or when it pans to each hero as they fight the Chitauri, is awesome. There's no denying it. It comes down to Whedon just getting these characters, their dynamics and what makes them special or unique. Say what you want about Whedon, and there's certainly plenty good or bad to be said, but he nails this film, and it set the tone for a lot of the MCU going forward, for better or for worse. Then we have the end credit scene, where we have Thanos, the big bad that would be the main villain for the MCU, at least up to this third phase. He looks a little bit rough here. It's a bit awkward looking as far as CGI goes, but it was meant to be just a wink to the audience, kind of an Easter egg to fans, and of course it grew from there. And then we have the shawarma scene at the very, very end. It's funny, this was filmed like a day after one of the premieres. It didn't even appear in European cuts of the movie theatrically, and people were speculating online like, oh, what could it be? It could be a tease for a second villain, or oh, and then it was that. It's an okay joke. It could have gone without it personally. It makes no, it's not a big deal at all really. There's no need for it, but it is what it is. And we of course have our Stan Lee cameo as well, which when they're cutting to the news and the impact and effect of the Avengers in the war in New York, he just goes, superheroes in New York? Give me a break. It's a nice nod to the man who made really New York a home for superheroes through Marvel, so it's quite a sweet little cameo. I don't know if this is an indication of how I feel about this movie, but for some reason, of all of these movies, at times I'm a bit mixed. Sometimes I don't want to sit down and watch them again, but I didn't feel that way about the Avengers. It's a film that changed the blockbuster landscape and possibly set the high bar for the summer popcorn flick. The effects hold up, the jokes work, even though mileage may vary on that one depending how many times you've seen it. But what will always stand up is the characters, the action scene, and the culmination of Marvel's first phase of films. This put the MCU on the map. And while originally some of the films were seen as niche or nerdy movies that weren't on everyone's radar after the event that was the Avengers, everyone knew about these characters and this universe. Standards were high for what would come next for the MCU. Audiences loved the Avengers, and subsequent films would take heavy inspiration from it, and not always with great success. In certain ways, the Marvel formula that so many people deride was laid out in the Avengers, and later films would copy it to mixed success. We couldn't get the next Marvel movie until the following year, 2013, with the start of Phase 2. And that's what we're going to talk about next month. That's the first phase of Marvel movies. As I said, next month we're going to look at Phase 2, and the month after that's going to be Phase 3. So I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Pop Cult Pod. I've been your cult leader and host, Tom Pot. Next week we're going to do a little bit of talk about Watchmen for its 10th anniversary. And aside from that, if you want to get in touch with the pod, you can hit me up on Instagram, popcultpod, all one word, Twitter, pop_cult_pod, Gmail, popcultpod@gmail.com, and wherever you're listening.